island states have managed to escape the virus so far. For most of us, this has been a very, very tough time. We have lost family, we have lost friends, and we have seen sickness ourselves. So, but just as when we think that the pandemic is about to be over, a new variant emerges and the cycle begins again. Can I have the next slide? So let us look at the figures so far. Since the beginning, there have been more than 510 million confirmed cases globally, and more than 6 million deaths have occurred. India has reported 43 million cases, and there have been some 500,000 deaths. The vaccine that can protect the people have been monopolized mostly by the rich countries, and globally around 65% of the people have been vaccinated with at least one dose of the vaccine. But there is a lot of inequity in this distribution. For example,
this is fake news.
Less than 22% of the people in Africa have received the vaccine, and less than 16% people in low-income countries. So what I was saying is that the vaccines have been monopolized by the rich countries, and the poor countries and the developing countries have not received as much vaccines as would be needed, and they are not as protected as one would have liked to have. Can I have the next slide? So there is a story beyond the data also that shows about the might of the virus, the way its variants, the pain and suffering and death it can cause, the empathy that people showed during the pandemic, and the things changed a lot during the lockdowns, and there was closure of schools, mental health issues emerged. Though there were leaps in technology development, there was increased manufacturing, but there was no inequity in this. There was a lot of global diplomacy, at least on face of it, but we saw a lot of insensitivity also during this period. So Down to Earth has been reporting on these stories from the ground from day one. Can I have the next slide? So we carried the first story on COVID in February 2020, even before WHO declared the pandemic. Everyone was trying to understand what this novel disease was. In April 2020, we carried a story on how globalization actually led to the spread of pandemic, and another one on how lockdowns were changing the entire world. In May 2020, the world found overall that it lacked the capacity to manufacture drugs, diagnostics, vaccines, and even the protective gear that was needed to protect the people from this virus. Can I have the next slide? So in May 2020, we investigated zoonotic diseases. The reason that we did it was that people were trying to investigate why and how COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus emerged. It was said that it emerged from the wet markets and the live markets in China's Wuhan area. And we tried to understand what was happening to the zoonotic diseases. In June 2020, the diagnostic kits became available, but we realized that mere testing without access to healthcare would not actually help. In July, there was a positive story that we did. The skies were bluer. Even in the most polluted of the cities, we got a glimpse of the world. So in August 2020, while COVID-19 got public attention in India, many other mysterious diseases were also circulating. So we did a story on that, and I will talk about it slightly later. The next slide, please. In May 20, the next slide, please, Ritika. So in September 2020, we found that Manrega helped the people who had to migrate back home. This was also a positive story. In November, we tried to understand the immune system and herd immunity, because that was what was being talked about at that time, because we thought by vaccinating 50% of the people, we would be protected. In January 2021, the vaccines became available. However, it was not sufficient. It was started in only a few countries, and the world had to just prepare for the vaccination drive. The next slide, please. In April 2021, we realized that India did not have enough vaccines despite being the vaccine hub for the world. Public sector vaccine manufacturers in the country have been sidelined. The reason for that was identified as that. In May 2021, is the second wave paralyzed the whole world. We had escaped the first wave very easily, but the second wave was really, really deadly for the country. In June 21, the virus reached even the rural areas, and we found that there was no equity in distribution of vaccines globally. And overall, the COVAX facility that had been developed by a lot of by 3 multilateral agencies failed completely to protect. The next slide, please. The next. In August 21, we found that unclear treatment protocols and irrational use of steroids worsened health indicators. In October, a resurgence of cases were seen even in countries where vaccination rates were high. In India, this situation was mimicked in Kerala, where also there was high levels of vaccination, but the situation was not under control. In December 21, a new variant appeared. January 22, the third wave of the disease disrupted India. Long COVID turned out to be as bad as COVID itself and affected 40% of the COVID-19 survivors. Children too began to show symptoms of long COVID. Schooling, physical activities, social interaction suffered, and routine immunization rates fell. And overall, it is expected that the life expectancy is going to go down by 2 years in children. The next slide, please. In March 2022, the world realized that the disease is now endemic. We have no idea how the virus is going to behave in an endemic state. Mutations keep on emerging, and health needs, what we can only say is that health needs to be higher on the political agenda. In April 22, as we have already seen that a new surge is about to begin, something is happening, the cases are going up, but we don't know how it will pan out. The next slide, please. So these are the 2 books that we brought out during the pandemic, and these talks about all the stories that we have covered in Down to Earth, and the studies and the investigations that we carried out. So the next slide. So as I said, the virus is unpredictable. Kerala has taught us that it is better to expect the unexpected. The state did exemplary work in pandemic control, but failed in the second surge. It showed high number of cases despite vaccination, had low case fatality rate, despite high number of elderly people and people living with non-communicable diseases. It had instituted strict lockdowns, but still the disease spread widely. The situation is actually very mysterious. So what do we do at this state? What we need to learn is we need to learn from the past. So COVID-19 is not the first pandemic that has occurred. For example, I will give you a few examples. Tuberculosis originated around 3 million years ago, and it still infects some 10 million people each year. Measles originated around 11th century, and 10 million cases are reported each year. Cholera was first reported in 1817, and anywhere near 1.3 to 4 million cases are reported per year. Similarly, influenza emerged in 1918, and 1 billion cases are reported each year. HIV/AIDS infection was reported in 1981 for the first time, and more than 39 million people are infected each year. So when a disease becomes endemic, it does not mean that it's gone. It's still going to lead to a lot of infection, is still going to affect a lot of people, and we need to be prepared for these. The next slide, please. However, these, as I said, we need to learn from them. These pandemics have taught us valuable lessons if you are willing to learn from them. For example, as far as in 1918, Spanish flu had shown the importance of non-pharmaceutical interventions such as isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, use of disinfectants, and limitation of public gathering. While we are still struggling to identify the case zero for COVID, in case of cholera outbreak, as far back as in 1854 in London, the whole science of epidemiology came into being. HIV/AIDS has taught us that about stigma and the need for correct messaging while we are talking about pandemics and informing people. TB led to the understanding of airborne diseases and the need for what we now call green architecture for improving ventilation. COVID-19 too has provided us with some learnings. For example, it has pushed technologies such as use of artificial intelligence in health, telemedicine, use of home diagnostics, and vaccines based on new technologies. But our struggle suggests that more is seriously needed because we have not dealt with COVID-19 as we could have maybe dealt with it. Can I have the next slide? So overall, we need to move back to the basic principles of public health is what we think. We need to manage our environment better to ensure that zoonotic diseases do not emerge. We need to invest into new technologies for developing vaccines and therapeutics. We need to create a robust public health system and ensure that it is available equally to everyone. What it shows that health needs to be high on political agenda. Now, next slide, please. So, sorry, can we go back to the last slide? Sorry. So we are talking about zoonotic diseases because, as I said, mentioned earlier, COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. And these are diseases that are likely to emerge more and more in the coming years because as the environment is getting degraded, there's more interaction between people and the original carriers of these diseases. So many diseases that we know of now have all emerged from the forests, and they are all zoonotic diseases. For example, dengue, Ebola, KFD, malaria, chikungunya, Kala Azar, SARS. These are all the result of human-animal interactions. So these, as we know from COVID, these diseases can derail life and economy, and such outbreaks are quite common. To ensure that we actually catch them in time, we need to have effective surveillance. So can I have the next slide? So we have a surveillance system in India. The responsibility for monitoring and controlling outbreaks is with National Centers for Disease Control, or NCDC. They have a special program called Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, or IDSP, which brings together information of outbreaks from each village in the country. Village health workers look out for 6 symptoms, and when they find a patient, they fill a suspect case form, take basic test samples, and direct the patient to the doctor. The doctors too keep a tab on the patient and report if they observe an unusual clustering of diseases. They fill a presumptive case form and direct the patient to a lab. The lab fills in L form, putting in data from the test. All this information is used to prepare a weekly outbreak report. Can I have the next slide? So these weekly reports are available on the NCDC site, and down to earth analyzed weekly outbreak reports from the year 2019 and 2020. We found that reports of 33 outbreaks of fever and 12 of acute encephalitis syndrome till the 3rd week of March. In the investigations by IDSP isolated the eliminated the usual suspects like malaria, dengue, chikungunya, and scrub typhus. While IDSP continued to keep the outbreak under surveillance in some cases, the final outcome was not available in public domain. Neither are the results of further investigations on the samples that were collected. So to find out what happened to these samples and if there is some information available in the public domain, DT searched the online medical journal database PubMed, and we searched for the term Integrated Disease Surveillance Program and found 16 results. None of them were on fever or AES outbreaks in the year 2019 and 2020. There was, however, one study that talked about, that analyzed the data from 2017. I will talk about this later after I give a snapshot of what the results were that we found. Can I have the next slide? So I know this is very small and we cannot read this, but I will give a couple of examples of what we found. In September 2019, 30 fever cases were reported in Telangana. Results of investigations are still awaited. In July 2019, 101 fever cases were reported in Maharashtra. Out of the 86 samples collected, only 3 were found positive for JE. So JE is usually one of the first thing to be expected in the case of encephalitis and fevers. In May 2019, a total of 1,350 cases of encephalitis were found in Assam. Out of these, 177 even died. However, only 11% were found positive for JE. So can I have the next slide? So as I mentioned, we found one analysis on data for data by IDSP. So this study showed that this study had researchers from NCDC and ICMR, and it showed that the causal factor could not be identified in 1/3 to 1/4 of the fever outbreaks. This is worrisome because if we don't know what the disease is, there's no way that we can control it. Also, there's an increased fear of emerging and re-emerging diseases in the country. For India, researchers have identified 43 emerging and re-emerging viral diseases that can threaten the country. 23 of these are of zoonotic origin. There are reports that zoonotic diseases are spreading across the country fast. For example, Nipah virus that was initially identified in Siliguri is now there was an outbreak in Kerala in 2018. Similarly, scrub typhus, which is traditionally reported from Himachal Pradesh, but now it affects children in Gorakhpur also. A recent report also indicates the presence of Kala Azar in Kerala, though the disease is typically reported from Bihar. These outbreaks can be fatal in absence of strategies and policies to fight them. In 2015, a joint monitoring mission advised IDSP to look for zoonotic emerging and re-emerging diseases. The National Health Policy 2017 also advocates the need for districts to respond to communicable diseases, but only well-known zoonotic diseases like rabies are mentioned in the document. Can I have the next slide? So what did we find? What are the other things that we found from our study? We found that these reports are uploaded retrospectively. The last weekly alert when we did the study in August was from March. All states do not report the cases, and the alert for March 16 to 22 was based on information received only from 17 states and mentioned there were wide discrepancies mentioned in the total tally and within the weekly report also. So there was actually no really good response to the data. It was not being dealt with very well. So we also found that though it is very well realized that the institute has a lot of work to do and it is a very important institute, it has not been able to use all the allocated budget. For example, in 11 out of the 13 years between 2004 and 5 to 2016 and 17, expenditure was lower than the allocated budget. The next slide, please. So we have some long unresolved examples of mystery diseases also. We know them very well. For example, in case of case of Gorakhpur disease is very well known. Since 2005, encephalitis cases are being reported from Gorakhpur and surrounding districts. Initially, it was believed to be Japanese encephalitis, and vaccines were administered regularly. But the disease continued to kill, and alternate theories emerged. For example, National Institute of Virology considered enterovirus, but the presence of the virus could not be actually linked to the disease. Then scrub typhus was implicated, but the symptoms observed are very atypical, so that was also not considered to be true. Similarly, cases of encephalitis deaths were reported from Muzaffarpur and surrounding districts. Here too, multiple theories are doing rounds, while some link it to pesticide use, others link it to deaths, to heat strokes in the area. The disease has also been linked to toxins present in lychee, which is fatal for undernourished children. In 1880s, cases of encephalitis were reported from Saharanpur in UP and surrounding districts too. Investigations by NICD at that time, now the organization is what is now called NCDC, in 2002 identified JE as the cause, while ITRC, which is now called IITR, it's a CSIR organization, linked it to pesticides. A team of independent researchers linked the disease to toxins present in cassia seeds. Can I have the next slide? So what we find is things have not changed too much in the last 20 years. In 2001, we had carried a story on fevers of unknown origin, and the story that we carried in August in 2020. Also, we find that the diseases are still a mystery. Next slide, please. So how do we solve this mystery? It is clear today that to make any impact and for solving the mystery, real-time monitoring of diseases outbreaks is needed, and findings need to be provided in a transparent manner. There is a need to increase human resource capacity. For example, there is a shortage of epidemiologists, pathologists, neurologists, toxicologists, public health experts, and pediatricians that have been identified during the COVID-19 pandemic too. Medical doctors have to be taught the basics of outbreak investigations also. Can I have the next slide? So, the topic was making of pandemics. So there are many other pandemics that India and the world is making. Right now we have a pandemic of AMR, for example. Just a few figures. AMR can lead to 10 million deaths each year and result in economic loss equivalent to USD 150. Consumption of antibiotics is increasing, and by 2030, it is estimated to go up by 200%. Unlike the quick research that we have seen in the case of COVID-19 diagnostics and vaccines, the pipeline for antibiotics is very weak, and there's a declining private investment in this research. The World Health Organization has identified AMR as one of the 12 global health challenges in 2020. To prepare for the impending situation, UN set up the Integrated Coordination Group on Antimicrobial Resistance in 2016. The group formulated a blueprint to fight against antimicrobial resistance, in which it recommended a One Health response. So can I have the next slide? So why does CSC talk about AMR? Because there's a direct link between AMR and what we are doing to our environment. Again, this slide maybe it's not very clear, but I will give you a few examples of this. For example, as antibiotics are easily available, people tend to use them indiscriminately. People do not finish the prescribed course of treatment when they get better, and this helps the microbe become resistant. We have seen this in case of the COVID-19 pandemic also, where antibacterials were used to actually treat a viral disease. So climate change has another example is climate change can result in rapid multiplication of microbes. This provides conditions conducive to the development of resistance, and so they can spread more easily and not respond to medicines. There are large amounts of antibiotics that are being used to for growth promotion in animals that are used for food. Poor hygiene measures in areas where animals are housed or among the people who work on farms result in the spread of these drug-resistant infections. Antibiotics are also used for controlling bacterial and fungal diseases in plants. There's not much logic in that, but they are still used. And these residues accumulate in the soil, and they get to our food and on our table, and through the food that comes from the fields. Can I have the next slide? So, as I talked about the pandemic of antibiotic resistance, there's also a pandemic of non-communicable diseases that is linked to the environment that we have created. So these NCDs are not the simple pathogen disease linkages that we are used to. They have multiple triggers, and the interplay between these triggers is not really well understood. Many of these triggers are in the environment, as I would explain in a while. In case of NCDs, comorbidities are common. One NCD can make a person susceptible to another. Treatment is difficult, expensive, and lifelong. We have seen that poor are more susceptible to even these diseases. Unfortunately, research on these diseases often remain unconclusive, and it's not very clear how to treat them. Can I go to the next slide? So I mentioned that NCDs also have an environment link. For example, obesity is linked to poor diet, lack of physical activity, and exposure to obesogenic chemicals. And in many of the NCDs, air pollution and climate change are playing an important role. For example, respiratory diseases and hormonal diseases are linked to exposure to toxins and air pollution. Climate change is also adding to the whole situation. For example, respiratory diseases are being caused because of changes in patterns of pollen production by plants. Food allergies are also linked to the diet that we are having. We are being exposed to new chemicals through our diet. We are being exposed to GM crops. In many cases, because of consumption of antibiotics and consumption of bad food, there's an absence of healthy gut microflora, which also affects our health. Can I have the next slide? So in the future, we feel that climate change is going to play a major role in a lot of diseases that we are going to see. For example, there's due to temperature rise, sea level rise, and changes in water patterns, diseases, vector-borne diseases, waterborne diseases, and psychological impacts can occur. This can lead to a variety of diseases, as you can see, from malaria, asthma, heat stress, injuries, and there could be also forced migration, anxiety, post-traumatic depression, despair, and a variety of diseases can emerge from climate change. Can I have the next slide? So what is the take-home message for us? It is clear that unless we address the environmental triggers of these diseases, we will not be able to protect people from lifetime of suffering. We would not be able to improve economy or even meet the sustainable development goals. So we need to fix the system for the future, but we need to do it today. Can I have the next slide? I will end with a couple of slides about what Center for Science and Environment actually does. So the CSE was established in 1980. It's a public health, public interest research institute, and we carry out policy research to increase public awareness. Our core areas of work include water, forest management, air, climate change, energy, habitat, industry, education, and many, many more. We make an effort to bridge the gap between information and knowledge. Down to Earth is a fortnightly magazine that is brought out that supplements CSE's research and analysis. The magazine was launched in 1992 May. It's going to be 30 years of our magazine now. And we bring the stories from the ground and try to understand the real issues that affect the people in the remotest part of the country. The next slide, please. So CSC has a variety of campaigns and investigations. These include mostly pesticides and toxins in our environment. We have done studies on antibiotics in honey, chicken, fish. We have looked at trans fats in oils and genetically modified ingredients in processed food. We have looked at heavy metals in cosmetics, and we have looked at high levels of salt, sugar, fats in junk food. This is just a small list. We have many other campaigns that you could check on our website. Can I have the next slide? So I will, this is one of the studies that we did. In 2001, villagers from Padre village in Kerala wrote to CSC about a mysterious disease that was affecting the children in that area. They were facing diseases like cerebral palsy and mental health issues. So we sent a team of reporters and to that area. We found that endosulfan, a pesticide, was being used extensively in the area. For the last 20 years, it was being sprayed aerially on the cashew nut plantation. And this endosulfan had accumulated in the soil, surface water, and wells in that area. And we found that crops cultivated from this water was providing food to the people, and they were getting exposed to this toxin. Our study was used in a court case, and finally it had a impact on policy, and the use of pesticide was banned in the state. Even now, Kerala is now growing using organic cultivation, and there's a growing revolution of good food in the state. Can I have the next slide? So as I was saying that we try to bridge the gap between information and knowledge, that we try to do through action. We do research for policy advocacy, so that we can bring about a change. The next slide, please. So I will end with this, and thank you once again.
Yeah, Ritika.
Thank you, Ritika. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, sorry, there were some technical glitches from my end too.
It does nothing compares to mine.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was, I found it very humbling and at times very spine chilling as well. So let me ask you. Let me begin with the sort of a broad strokes question. So I feel human beings are an anomaly in a sense, because never in the history of the planet have we had 7 billion of the same species all over the planet, and who have also changed the planet in so many ways. And so in the broad context of the connection between health of the environment and our own health, do you feel the biggest challenge is because people in general do not get how our actions individually and collectively affect the environment? Or is it that we get that, but then beyond that, how do we go and we're stuck there? Where's the crux of the problem, do you feel?
As you said, the population is huge. But I don't think that is the biggest problem that results in causing environmental damage. As we can see, the use of I will give the example of what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because the traffic was shut down because of lockdown, there was no air pollution. The skies were bluer. So it is, how we manage. We think that we can do whatever we want to do to the environment and we can escape that. But then as COVID-19 has shown, we are really, really very small in this thing, and the smallest virus can actually take a revenge that can put us in homes and can sicken us. So the environment has a lot of recuperating power, but the problem happens that so many of us, and everyone has their own needs and greeds and everything, and we try to exploit too much. Once we realize that this exploitation is what is causing, affecting our health, it would be a better, we might be better able to deal with this issue. For example, another example that I could give is we are cutting down forests everywhere. We are making roads and everything, but these are habitats of animals which have these diseases normally. Like it's not does not kill them, but when we come in contact with them, it affects us. So somewhere we need to make a line. We need to draw a line that this is what we should do. Unfortunately, as you can see from the COP negotiations each year, we are not willing to actually reduce our impact on the environment. We are not willing to change our lifestyles. We want more, and we don't want to protect the environment much.
Jam, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask something on the long-term environmental impact, because of the impact of the pandemic on the economy, many capital-intensive activities, things have changed, right? I mean, do you see this causing long-term environmental impact? I mean, globally, not just in India, but
see, there has been a lot of change, is what we can see. How it is going to affect the environment, I don't know how that is going to affect, because as each lockdown ends and each cycle ends, we are rushed towards what we are used to. So when we say the economy is up again, it's actually we are going back to what we were doing earlier. So changes might happen in the technologies and how we deal with the problem. For example, healthcare is one of the fields that is going to be affected by the pandemic. But in terms of developmental projects, I do not see much changes. For example, new roads are being made even now. There are announcements each day about forests being cut to make way for industries or new roads, and this is going on. And at this moment, it's very difficult to say what the long-term impact would be on this. We have to actually change our thinking, which is not actually very visible right now.
So how do you recommend, like, how can we make small inroads into just not wanting to rush back where we were and not wanting the same normal, which got us into this, the big mess that COVID-19 pandemic turned out to be so far?
Okay, that's a really good question. I wish I knew the answer. I would have been out on the roads giving this answer, but it's a very difficult question. At a personal level, I think each of us can make a change. But to what extent that is going to help is not clear. We can also demand our governments to be more sensitive to the environment that they are custodians of, and that has to be done. We can demand, but the governments have to actually figure this out, because they also have to provide food and whatever to a lot of people. So it has to be, it's a very difficult question, but yes, the answer lies with us, because we are the only people who are affecting the environment. So the answer does lie with us. We have to figure it out, and till the time the governments and the world figures it out, we as individuals can do a lot of things. We can reduce our consumption. Okay, it looks very little, that okay, how does it matter if I don't use a plastic bag today? But it's a small speck of a drop that would help, and we can maybe green our environment, our localities. We can save water. We can do a lot of things at local levels. But the main important thing would be to demand. Once we realize that we are making the change, the government should not be actually allowed to go scot-free.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned the AI in health. So that has come up since COVID. COVID. So but in India though, what do you feel the general understanding of AI is in general and also in terms of health?
Not much. Not much has actually come also. But telemedicine has actually picked up a lot during the pandemic. So this was one field that people were not very, very comfortable with. Why should we not go to a doctor? Why is a doctor not available? But this option is now being used by people because we were forced to do it during the lockdowns and everything. So AI, I think, is in a very, very, very nascent stage at this moment for India, for a local person, for a person, a normal person like us, maybe not you, but us. So that it is going to grow, but now people realize that technologies are part and parcel of our life, like just like mobile phones are part of our life now. This the use of technology is going to increase in the future a lot. It is a very good thing, maybe.
On that, can I ask something supplementary? Because on the other hand, for the use of AI and understanding of, a finer understanding of the environment, in mapping in many ways and getting finer information, do you think that can make a big impact in places like India? I mean, I don't know.
It would provide a lot of valuable data, which we really need. We find that data is really not available for anything. And it would actually help in computing the adverse effects of anything that we do. And it's a very good idea to use AI for monitoring and actually creating a database.
I've actually read about efforts to use citizen science to contribute data from people in very large ways and use AI to collect it and turn it into form that scientists can make use of, and so citizens also participate in because this is also a problem in environmental data. If it is all authoritative official data and the people do not have a sense of participation, many of the problems that you talk about continue to be an issue, right?
So that is what we as CSC have been doing for a very long time. For example, the endosulfan case that I said, okay, these people could not monitor. They needed us to monitor it. We had to carry out a lab study for them, but they could see that this was creating a lot of adverse effect. The use of endosulfan was creating adverse effect on their health. So they could tell us. So that is not the only case that people have observed and people have reported. Maybe all the data, all their understanding and their observations need to be validated by researchers, but they do see, and citizen science, if they are not being able to calculate themselves or observe themselves or monitor themselves, they could actually approach authorities which can do it for them, labs which are open to the public, like they can help.
Yeah.
So Ranjani has a comment here. Ranjani, would you like to unmute and share?
Yeah, I was basically responding to this comment about the knowledge about the environment being held with the local people. As part of the National Biodiversity Act, the People's Biodiversity Register pretty much attempts to do that only. In fact, I mean, this is not a question as much just an explanation of my comment. So I think there is a move to actually document what people know of the biodiversity and actually have communities involved in the conservation, but I don't really know how much political will and how much resources is getting pushed into that. So we seem to be rather moving in the direction of centralizing our understanding of environments and ecology, and I don't know that it seems like we are actually moving in the opposite direction. I mean, even the response to COVID has been characterized a lot by centralized responses, not really involving or responding to what communities need at a local level. Just to explain what I wrote there.
So your example of biodiversity is a very good one. We are working on this also, and recently I went to a couple of villages and I tried to understand what they know of biodiversity and their local ecology. Unfortunately, what we found out was that most of the people's biodiversity registers were made during the lockdown because of a court case in NGT, and people had no idea what they were supposed to do with that register or how to actually even prepare it. So uh, you know, the whole idea of community telling someone that, okay, this is our knowledge and this is what we want to do with it is actually lost. So at the same time, there's a biodiversity amendment bill that is being reviewed right now. So, you know, it's always, as you said, it's getting very centralized and it is a very difficult situation. There's a whole problem between what people want, what government wants, and what is actually good for the environment. So it was a very interesting point of that you made.
So in general, though, since we mentioned citizen science, is there further activities or some avenues there that could be used to at least not dig the hole deeper, if not get us out of it? Do you have any suggestions?
See, it's a very important field of science. Like, good observations are always useful. It has to be documented. It has to be analyzed. Like when we say the information has to become knowledge, which is what, you know, that whole continuum that I showed, it has to become knowledge and it has to lead to some kind of a policy change. So research itself is not going to help. So 10 people just observing 10 species of birds is not going to make a difference unless you say that 10 years back there were 20 species, now there are only 10, so we need a change. So that has to come. Like, that is the whole continuum of information, advocacy, and knowledge that we talk about at CSC. So it's a very tough thing,
Right.
but people are now very aware about their surroundings. COVID has created that kind of a situation. So we have an opportunity that we can use. So if they see what has happened during COVID, maybe that is one good project to start with.
That's very good. So some good things, some silver lining.
Yeah, but I don't think people want this kind of a silver lining. It would have been better not to have it. And though it's a difficult, like, there is going to be a revenge. The microbes will take a revenge once in a while, because we are actually trying to do a lot of things to our environment, the place that they live. But we can try to do our best to improve environmental health.
Absolutely. You had mentioned GM crops. So there is a lot of, obviously very on both sides, like very much hyped up information about them. There is the thing of, the need that is touted for them, why we need them. But what is the flip side? What are we not seeing in terms of how we should view them, and can it be harmful in the long run?
Well, that's what the general feeling is, that they're going to be very harmful in the long run. We do a lot of work on good food also. There is a huge variety of foods which India has, because we are a biodiversity rich country. So we have a huge variety of foods that can actually compensate. We don't need GM. If it is needed, yes, go ahead and do it. That's not a problem. Just tell us, ensure that it is safe. If as a consumer, I don't want to have GM, I should have the right to know on the label of a packaged food that it has GM. But as I was saying, we do a lot of work on food, and there are highly nutritious food available in the country. There are foods which are disease resistant, they are drought resistant, they are climate sensitive. They would actually, if we could just promote those, maybe learn from them, maybe do some kind of a normal hybridization that could help more in the longer run. And the problem with GM is more not the technology, not the harmful effects, or as much as the monopolization of a technology by companies. So the same thing that it is my thing, you are using it and you're not giving it. It's the same thing that Ranjani was talking about. Biodiversity is the same biodiversity someone has taken out of it, and they're making profits out of it, which is not justified mostly, unless they're coming up with something that is really going to feed the world. But so far, that has not happened. Even in the case of GM cotton, which is one of the most hyped up products, the GM cotton also uses a large amount of pesticide, which is harmful for the health. So what's the use? Why are we doing this? Why are we even moving in that direction when there are better paths available? And if we learn from GM cotton, that's not the path to go towards. And why should just a few people make profits? They're not sharing with the community, which has the not just the community, with the countries also. For example, I was reading up about a case of Monsanto taking a gene out of watermelon to make it disease resistant, but they did not want to pay India for that. So it's a very unjustified world. And if we move towards GM crop, we are actually supporting that kind of a unjustified move.
Right.
May I?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, after all this, is there some initiative in the country? I mean, from especially from environmentalist perspective, from scientists, for what do we do for the next pandemic? I mean, how are we prepared, and what should we be doing as a community of scientists on that? I'm just saying that I know it's a bit vague to say, but it seems like a logical question to ask.
No, it's what we have been writing about for a very during the pandemic. So what we have seen, that preparedness is really, really, really important. So preparedness comes in terms of having, sorry, there's a fly around here. So preparedness come from, like we should have enough health professionals. We need enough public sector manufacturing of goods. For example, things like even PPE could be made quickly only if there's a manufacturing capacity there. So preparedness is the most important thing. Obviously, taking steps to avoid the whole problem is foremost, but preparedness, investing in the technologies, ensuring that the public sector is really, really strong. For example, in the initial times of initial days of the COVID, the public healthcare system, the private hospitals refused to take patients. So that, and here we are actually promoting private healthcare. Why are we promoting when they have shown that they are not capable of protecting the people at the time of need? Why should we do that? So preparedness, investing in public sector, ensuring that the environment is clean, that is obviously the basic thing. These things don't emerge, but these are important, and this is what the pandemic has actually taught us.
And perhaps also more decentralization.
Yes, that too.
Yeah, I mean, even this week we have seen, in reaction to the heat wave, a state simply announcing, let's say, closure of schools and colleges for 10 days. Now, but the state has different geography. I mean, there is one part where it is snowing and one part it is heat wave. To just make one central decision for the whole state is pretty much.
Yes, obviously that is going to be, that is the foremost. Like the communities know the best. As we were talking about citizen science, we know the best. We know what is happening around us. And if we don't know, we should be made aware by letting us make decisions like teaching a child, if it is like teaching a child, which I don't think it is, because all of us are like, we have ages of like nearly 100 years of experience right now also, because we have older people with us, we have younger people with us. So that experience is there, but we need to be allowed to express it. We need to be allowed to implement these things. So decentralized is good. Unfortunately, the way it happens, first the centralized decisions are taken. When everything goes wrong, states are told to take care of themselves, as we can see in case of diagnostics and vaccines. So it becomes very difficult. So it has, the system on paper looks very good. There's a center, there's a state, and there's a local panchayat also. It does not work unless you enable the panchayats and local bodies to perform and take responsibilities and for their action, because corruption is across. So they also need to be able to take the responsibility for their action, and they are answerable to their own family members and local community also.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vibha, for wonderful talk and giving us so much to think about. There is definitely a lot for all of us to individually as well as collectively push for, to prepare ourselves and do better. So thank you so much. It was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. And let me, may I end with a call for volunteers, as always we do. I mean, ISRC is a voluntary forum, and it's by people's participation that the group can do a lot more. So science communicators, please come, and I hope people watching on YouTube will also volunteer for ISRC. And, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was really wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.